Hi there, I'm Heather Flannery. I am the Health Circle Global Lead with Consensus, responsible for Consensus Health. I'm also the chair of the Standards Development Working Group P2418.6 at the IEEE Standards Association that is developing blockchain and blockchain in healthcare and life sciences standards. I'm the co-founder and board chair for another IEEE organization under ISTO called Blockchain in Healthcare Global, and I'm the co-chair for the Blockchain Task Force at the Health Information Management Systems Society, or HIMSS. It's an amazing thing to have twice in one lifetime an opportunity to participate in a wholesale paradigm shift. My career got started at the dawn of the commercial internet, and as a very young and precocious person, I was able to participate in really revolutionary and extraordinary transformation. Through the course of my career, I've always been a technologist, and I've carried that forward. And because of my own experience as a patient, I became very passionate about healthcare and life sciences. That part of my career started in about 2005, 2006. And the areas where I was most passionate about focusing was creating integrated care delivery models, clinical interfaces between the specialties that treated complex chronic diseases, and manifesting a model where precision medicine and individualization of care would be possible. As I went into the field as an entrepreneur, working on those kinds of structural systemic challenges, and bringing with me my technology background that I had always had, naturally I gravitated toward using innovative technology in order to drive new business models. The thinking about care delivery from a systemic perspective that spans organizational boundaries and crosses jurisdictions had me focusing intently on the kinds of challenges that blockchain can address, and the kind of misaligned incentives and distorted incentives that characterize the relationships between these adversarial groups of stakeholders. So I was, prior to blockchain, I was working to solve the same kinds of problems that are at the heart of this community and the potential of this technology, but without this technology. So I was doing things the very hard way, and in a sense being stymied by what theoretically is possible at an engineering level, but we all know has not actually worked at scale. For example, we do exchange data. That happens. We do trade information. That happens. People do sell data. That happens. Patients do receive care. The information moves, but it moves exceedingly slowly and very expensively. And the legal and compliance environment and the rapidly increasing cybersecurity threat vectors and attack frequency and severity that our industry has been subject to all affect this dynamic, where the current state is untenable, and now we have new technology that opens up new doors and new possibilities. Well, I had not been particularly engaged in the crypto space. I wish I had been. That would have been a much better call on my part. But I became really interested in blockchain when Ethereum was released. And I'd had my eye on it just as a curiosity prior to that, but hadn't really focused in. So for me, it was all about how do I apply this new technology to accomplish precisely what my business objective happens to be. And in that process of attempting to implement ecosystem level mutualized federated infrastructure, I learned all of the very concrete reasons why we have real problems to solve before we can get this technology adopted at scale. And scalability is only just one of many. Most of these barriers live in non-technical categories, and standards features significantly among them. But governance, capital formation, the mutualization of risk, For example, no one knows how to write an insurance instrument to protect the interests of a consortia of actors in a blockchain ecosystem today. That's just one example of many challenges. So in my process of attempting to do this, often we learn so much through failure, through the striving. So I ended up with what I think is a pretty crystalline view of what doesn't work and what needs to be fixed, and that's carried me forward now into working to contribute to the industry to the best of my ability, broad-based sectoral level attempts, collectivized attempts at addressing these challenges. And then it's a great honor to be part of Consensus and leading Consensus Health, who has so much to offer from a technology perspective and an infrastructure perspective and capital formation and all of these other categories. So a lot of my work is in that category, and a lot of my work is purely volunteer. So everything that I do for IEEE and for HIMSS is not compensated. It is done for the best interest of the industry as a whole, and for the best interest of the patient, which represents every single human being on Earth. I think this book is going to represent a very important contribution to the lexicon at a point in time when it is most needed, and using a distribution model that will make it particularly accessible and consumable to the parties that are seeking to adopt this technology. My particular contribution to what I think is going to be a remarkable piece of work is at the area or at the intersection of standards and blockchain. So I find myself in an interesting position where I am at a nexus of a number of different organizations that are driving and contributing substantially to the advancement of this technology. And I think one thing that bears mentioning is that there are two philosophies for standards development and one giant risk. The biggest risk is that standards are developed in such a way that squashes innovation, that slows the process of solving major problems, because perhaps standards could be drafted around a technology that really doesn't meet the needs of the end state or the end state vision. And if you look back through the history of how these things have happened, there are successful attempts at creating standards that added a tremendous amount of value and enabled commercial success. There are also, it's like littered with stories of failed attempts that created problems and inhibited industries and slowed things down. And so the people that have been close to standards development usually have representative examples of where it's worked well and where it's worked very poorly. So the most fundamental principle is to enable and not inhibit innovation. And then the two philosophies are either de facto standards development, where effectively something is already in place and then it is later codified and blessed and instantiated and formalized. But that's a backward or rearward looking standards development activity. The other philosophy or model is a forward-looking, shine the light to what could be possible and use the standards development process to remove barriers to being able to adopt this technology. One thing that is particularly characteristic of this technology is that it involves ecosystems of actors using this new utility, this new service layer. And so the requirement for semantic and ontological structure of data for potentially hundreds of micro use cases that extend far beyond where the data standards models have gotten to today, that is a defining characteristic of what we're looking at here. And a lot of the standards that have been developed at the data layer are more static and less transactional. They're less about data in motion and more about data at rest. So there's also, sort of metadata components that aren't really present or aren't working well in other standards that we need to articulate. So the P2418 body of standards is anchored in the IEEE Standards Association, and that's their blockchain family. And each of the dots, P2418.1.2.3, et cetera, build a particular layer of the architecture or add a certain verticalization of the structure. The working group that I chair is P2418.6. That's healthcare and life sciences. So it's adding that verticalization on top of horizontal infrastructure layer standards that are P2418.1 and 2 and others. Also, cross-sectionally, IEEE has an extraordinary legacy of collaboration with other international standards development organizations such that there is harmonization. And we also have already embedded de facto standards or other standards that parties have created within ours. So we're not seeking to compete with standards. We want to accelerate the good work that's already been done. For an example of that is the Decentralized Identity Foundation, the DID standard. We have embedded that within a blockchain-related standard that pertains to that. So that's a couple of examples there. As we look at de facto standards, so aside from my role, my volunteer role with IEEE, I also am a member of the healthcare working group at the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, where Ethereum specifications and reference architectures are being developed that also work with standards that are coming out of the Ethereum Foundation for things like different kinds of crypto assets, like ERC20 and ERC721 for non-fungible crypto assets, and many others. So those are very, very rapidly and efficiently emerging de facto standards that are not being put forward by an official standards development body, but where we are working through the Enterprise Ethereum Foundation, harmonizing with IEEE and the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance in order to create unity. And in addition to that, one thing that's incredibly important for healthcare and life sciences is that blockchain architectures don't become the new data blockers. They don't become the new silos. So one of the reasons that early standardization, again, not to quash innovation, but to ensure interoperability and liquidity. For example, we need portability of smart contracts. We need portability of crypto assets. We need cross-chain data flow at scale, and we need it sooner than later, not someday. In fact, the whole industry is nervous about the ability of the competing blockchain platforms to actually demonstrate what we say is a shared value. Everybody says we're going to live in a multi-chain future. There's not going to be one winner. And the basis of competition between the platforms can't be blocking the flow of transactions. And I think everyone is in alignment with that. I know leadership from the Hyperledger Foundation, the Hyperledger project within the Linux Foundation is in alignment with that. The Enterprise Ethereum Alliance has just had the Hyperledger project join them. The Enterprise Ethereum Alliance has just joined the Linux Foundation and the Hyperledger project. The two healthcare working groups are aware of one another's existence and are now coming together around a shared mission. Those things are taking shape right now, and by the time of the publication of the book, there will be more that we can share about that kind of the kind of unity and common cause that can bring us together, and clarity. There will be competing platforms. Competition isn't bad or immoral. It's only if we use things as the basis of competition that are inappropriate. And so driving that interoperability message and for the benefit of the patient, for the things that we are all accountable for doing in this space is really important and top priority work.
In collaboration and community has been a common theme this year, I think, at this conference for sure. It's something that I've heard from a lot of people who have sat in that chair today. What do you see being some other real pressing issues as far as blockchain coming into the healthcare field?
Yeah, so we have a real significant challenge in the area of identity, and that intersects with privacy and cybersecurity and policy and patient or citizen sovereignty. We there's a lot of dialogue in the blockchain healthcare community that tends to orient around de-identification of absolutely everything and focusing on use cases that don't deal with any identified data. What I would call to all of our attention is that while there is incremental value for us to gain down the path of those use cases, and I'm a huge advocate for that, and we should continue to advance the actual structural revolution that is possible for us ultimately involves getting the patient in the center or the research participant in the center. That we cannot move around that party like the current state data brokerage industry does. They are selling anonymized data, and it has some value, but because you can't re-identify it and move it back into mainstream medicine, for example, to deliver an intervention, to deliver precision medicine, to activate someone into a trial, on and on, that value, it's there is value, but it is capped. So we have to solve the patient matching problem, which is a long-standing, incredibly difficult issue that many brilliant people have spent entire careers trying to solve. We should not be trite and oversimplifying about what that really means, but we have a possibility of solving it now. And the policy and ethical questions about the role of biometrics and how we want to use that, about our genetic data and how that is going to be protected and its role in identity. These are very challenging questions. But we have the technological means to deliver confirmed identity to a level of certitude that meets the needs of healthcare. There are a number of ways of accomplishing that, but a decentralized identity, potentially paired with a biometric attestation, is one way. There's also identity by consensus, which is a way of effectively crowdsourcing attestations of a claim that something is a certain thing or a certain person. And then as we think about identity, it's very easy to think that we only mean a person, but places and things also require identification, and they require that same level of certitude, particularly in life and death situations, that a certain prosthetic actually goes on a certain leg of a certain person at a certain time, not a different person, not a different leg, not a different device, and on and on. So I think that's going to be a very significant challenge. It's going to require a lot of experimentation, and it's hard to experiment with things that can impact life and death situations. We have to manage risk very carefully, and we have to be very ethically intentional about as we go about it. So there's also, I mentioned biometrics and identity, but there's also implants, there's chips, there's a merger of man and machine, or human being and other things that are also introduced into this picture, and are all happening on approximately the same event horizon. And we're going to need to make decisions and act. We won't have the option of inaction. It will be impossible not to act because these changes are coming at us. So how can we be ethically intentional? How can we be patient-centered, mission-focused, collaborative, and facilitate a healthy transformation of our industry rather than wall everything off with the intent of maintaining an impossible stasis? that will never, it won't happen. So myself and many other leaders in the field are thinking of it in those terms. Let's facilitate a positive, ethically intentional transformation, but it has to happen soon. It has to happen now. The change is happening all around us, and we can't hold on to the present state.